What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a review of Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous's final DLC, A Dance of Masks. A bit of a fun send-off for, I would say, much of the game, really, though it is important to mention that Owlcat has not ruled out the possibility of future updates, but this should very much so be the last DLC. With that in mind, there's a fair bit to cover, including new archetypes when this DLC even becomes available as it's part of the main campaign, etc. So let's actually start diving into this. So first and foremost, if you have no idea what this DLC even is, it is very much so inspired after Mass Effect's Citadel DLC, in that it's a last hurrah for your companions, including a bit of new content for each of them, new romance scenes, and of course some new enemies to fight. But right off the bat, I would say one of the biggest reasons to actually get this DLC period is the 11 new archetypes that it adds. That is to say, subclasses if you prefer, or just ways you could potentially play the game. Some of these are really strong. I've made a separate video going over the general details of each if you're interested, so I won't go over them here in detail, but two of them in particular really stood out to me, and that is Titan Fighter, which allows you to dual-wield two-handed weapons, which in this particular game with its mythic abilities and everything, and say you want to go into the Legend Mythic path, which effectively allows you to double your maximum level, to then multi-class it with something else. There's just a ton of really cool stuff you could do with that. And then the other one, and my personal favorite, is the new Kineticist archetype called the Kinetic Sharpshooter, which allows the base Kineticist to actually use a bow, and they get a handful of infusions that turn what would be their arrows into bolts of death. So very excited to play through the game with that for myself, which is what I plan on doing as a sort of last hurrah for my own enjoyment. But let's get into the bulk of the content here. So right away, how do you even start this DLC? Well, this is the part that's a little tricky, because if you want to enjoy the story of this one, you're going to need a save file very close to the end, as you'll need to be in Act 5 and have taken out the city of Iz, which basically means that you're about to go to what the game calls Threshold, which is essentially the point of no return for the final leg of your journey. Now, if you have a save file at that point already, all you have to do is wait a couple of in-game days and they should show up in your war room to invite you to the city for this festival. The festival itself is taking place in Canabras to celebrate both your victories as the commander, but also the rebuilding of much of the city after its initial destruction at the beginning of the game. Now, once you actually get there, there's a ton of stuff to do. Yes, there is a little bit of a story to it. I won't spoil that too much, but it involves Razmir, the living god, which is a notable figure from Pathfinder lore, especially given that his title of the living god is a bit inaccurate, let's say. But that part's not really a spoiler, that's pretty well known. But that includes new enemies, new little things to get up to, and especially what I liked about this, which applies to the whole festival section really, is that you can actually go in and not announce who you are, that is to say the commander of the Crusades. You can simply blend in and be a regular person, which affects some of the events of the DLC a bit, which was a fun way to approach things. What's more though is the festival itself will actually change a decent bit depending on your own mythic path and your routes to get to that point. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't test this out with all the mythic paths, as some of my mythic path saves are so old that this DLC didn't seem to want to load in, but some of those are admittedly like pre-release saves, so I'm not inclined to believe that that's Owlcat's fault specifically, but each mythic path should enjoy some unique things here, with some being more drastic than others, like say the swarm that walks. But that's far from the only unique thing, because we will, of course, get new interactions with our companions, which are pretty front and center for this. Pretty much everyone that goes to the festival with you, that is to say actually made it to the end of your journey with you, gets a quest and some new interactions that kind of hone in on their personality, all of which is fully voiced. But because the festival is celebrating the events of the commander and his retinue, a lot of them are dressed up as you, which actually leads to one of my favorite of these little side quests, which is with Dayran actually, which I mentioned because he's not my favorite companion by far, but his little side quest is that you get to be involved in judging a look-alike contest for Dayran, people pretending to be him with his mannerisms and everything, which was really funny. So expect to get up to all sorts of things like that, and generally just stuff that's a bit more fun. Now, you might be wondering what the combat side of things is. And you got a few options there. For starters, there is some combat involved in just the main story, so to speak, of this DLC with Razmir and his acolytes and whatnot, but there is actually a big arena. The arena, I would say, is the bigger thing of note in this regard because you're going to face off against a bunch of, I would actually say, fairly challenging, handcrafted encounters. I don't want to spoil any of these, so you're likely not going to see any of them on screen, but what I will say is that they brought back a handful of enemies and whatnot from Kingmaker, actually, or at least the type of enemy, I should say, to add to this arena and make a whole bunch of unique encounters that were really fun to mess around with. Which is probably a good time to mention that you can get some incredible rewards in this DLC. Some are just available from shopkeepers, some will come from the arena, for instance, and then others, of course, just by progressing through the story portion. However, while these are extremely powerful items, it's worth remembering that, this is at the end game, so none of these are really going to change the game fundamentally in terms of moving through it up to that point. But what it might do for you is make some of the last few fights in the game a bit easier. And then, last but not least, before the DLC actually wraps up, every single romance gets a unique scene, tailored, of course, to that companion, as well as the romance and the relationship and how it's evolved throughout the course of the game. So, while I haven't seen all of these, I will say the ones I did see really did nail that. And all in all, I would say both that festival, all the interactions with your companions, the story itself, the romance scenes, etc., were all very satisfying if you've gone through the journey to get to that point, and it serves its purpose as a sort of last hurrah. But we're not quite done yet because, while I don't have the full details, there will be a free patch releasing alongside this DLC. And I do know one thing that it absolutely includes, and that is a brand new questline for the Devil Mythic Path. I would say the least fleshed out overall, which was a shame because actually unlocking that path is a pretty rewarding experience, but everything after, not so much. Now, it was more or less an open secret that they had worked on some content for this that never actually got finalized and put into the game, and this was a questline involving the devil and corrupting Queen Galfrey. And with this DLC, that will officially be in the game, but otherwise I'm not really sure what the patch releasing alongside this is going to include. So I guess it'll be a surprise to everybody. But probably unsurprisingly, I very much so enjoyed this DLC. When it comes to recommending it, well, that comes down to a few different things. Now, for me personally, I would say it's worth it just for the new archetypes. I think the rest of this could not even be here, and I would have happily paid just for those extras. Now, the catch to that is actually that when it comes to the content is where recommending it becomes a little more tricky, because realistically, this is a very long game, and this DLC is not available until the very end of it. Which means if you're looking at buying this for yourself, I would recommend it to people who already have a save at that point in the game. They can just load it up and move on from that point. But for somebody looking to buy this game and see if they enjoy it, I'd probably hold off, unless you just really want to play with one of these specific classes, until you're sure that you're actually going to get to the end of the game, because this game is notoriously quite difficult for people to get into thanks to all of its rules and character creation, etc., which I think is pretty well illustrated by the fact that Steam achievement rates for actually just beating the game, the achievement just for that, is at about 11.5%, and the achievement completion rate for the part of the story that would actually gain you access to this DLC isn't much better at just over 12%. I do have to wonder how many people will even have access to this DLC and the content therein, because of how late it becomes available. If you've made it all the way to the end of that journey, I think this is a wonderful send-off for those companions, and worth, I believe, the $12 this is launching at. And I can safely say for myself, now that we know that we've got this final DLC in our hands, I will likely do a last playthrough as well with that kinetic sharpshooter as my main character, enjoying all the upgrades and changes this game has brought over the years, so I can probably do a full re-review just to see how it is in totality now as compared to a few years ago, but also to finally look at doing my story series for this one, which has been a long time coming as I was waiting for these DLCs to finish, which I personally am excited for. So, with all of that said, I certainly hope you enjoyed this little review. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you think about all of this down in the comment section below. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.